Hi, Tom.
Hi, Rob.
So what's going on here? Mine looks like a little car and yours looks like a big bike.
No, that's true, Robert, and therein lies the dilemma for testers who are presented with vehicles like this and they may be unfamiliar with them.
And I imagine it's important that they're at the right class of test station.
Exactly. Some of these vehicles have steer and suspension that's similar to motorcycles, but despite this, they must be tested in vehicle test stations authorised for Class 3 or 4.
Not at a motorcycle test station. What about bikes with sidecars?
Well, they have to be tested at vehicle test stations authorised for 1 or 2.
OK, so I imagine we're going to be looking at these, at things like the Morgan three-wheeler, Del Boy's van, the Robin Reliant, the Scamel Scarab and the mechanical horse.
Yeah, don't get carried away. Today we're just going to be looking at trikes and quads. You see there's a section in the inspection manual, section 9, and it covers them. And for trikes and quads, it's additional testing information. So it needs to be read in conjunction with all the other sections of the inspection manual. For instance, if you've got a vehicle that's got motorcycle-derived steering and suspension, then section 9.2 replaces section 2.1 and 2.2. But all the rest of section 2 needs to be referred to. Now, the trouble with them is they come in all shapes and sizes, different weights, different wheel arrangements, engine sizes, fuel types. Yeah, I've got some pictures here. Just have a look at these ones here. See? Now see that?
Oh, look at that.
Now that's a pickup. It's a goods vehicle. And this one, that's got a whacking great V8 engine, automatic gearbox, and the back axles are Jaguar E-type.
I think I've worked with him.
I know, that is me, myself, personally, what was testing that. I tested that at a goods vehicle test station.
Right. Looks a bit daunting.
Not really, provided you follow the procedures and standards, it's not a problem.
And I guess that the manual tells you which class the vehicle is and what the test requirements are.
Yeah, as it always does. There's a chart in there, so the tester shows them how to decide which class. So if I try and explain that to you, if you had a vehicle with an engine size not more than 50 cc's and a maximum speed of 45 kilometres per hour, that's a moped, although it may have 3 wheels.
Right.
Now, if you've got one with an engine size over 50 cc's or capable of higher speeds, yeah, that's a trike.
And what about weight? Is that important?
Yeah, it's very important. You see, if the unladen weight is not more than 450 kilos, then it's tested as a Class 3. If the unladen weight is more than 450 kilos, it's tested as a Class 4, even if it's a trike. Now, the next bit's a little bit trickier.
Go for it.
Okay. If you've got a vehicle with 4 wheels and the unladen weight maximum is 350 kilos, that would be a moped if it met all those moped rules like engine size and maximum speed. That's known as a light quad. So that brings me nicely to quads. 4 wheels, of course, a maximum net power output from the engine 15 kilowatts. There's 2 unladen weights, maximum unladen weights to think about, 400 kilos or 550 kilos if it's a goods vehicle.
And what class are they tested as?
Well, it's easy. 4 wheels, Class 4. Do you want me to go through the whole thing again?
I think not right now, Tom. If I'm in any doubt, I can look in the manual.
Yeah, well done.
Now, you say these vehicles obviously are very unusual. They come in all different shapes and sizes with different engines.
Yeah, some of them have electric motors. And for mopeds, that must be not more than 4 kilowatts maximum output.
And how would you know that?
Right. If it's not stamped on the machine or the vehicle, then the presenter needs to provide documentary evidence of that. And one final thing, as we're talking about electrically powered vehicles, that maximum unladen weight I've spoken about does not include the battery power pack.
Now, Tom, what about trikes that have outrigger wheels? So, in fact, there are 5 wheels.
Right, this is a case of when there's a 5-wheel vehicle, a 3-wheel vehicle. Those outriggers are stabilisers. They're not normally in contact with the road. So, for testing, that's the trike, that's how we consider it. But if a tester were to find a defect in the stabiliser assembly, then they treat it as an anti-roll bar assembly, because that's its function. And if that defect met the reason for rejection, it would fail.
And are the normal refusal to test criteria the same?
Yes, they are. So, having said that, let's go and test these.
Yeah, OK. So Tom, do you have an inspection procedure?
Yes, and this is laid out in the introduction in the inspection manual on pages 8 and 9. And as you can see, that's for a car, but the principles are the same for trikes or quads. I mean, a tester will do the route that's best for them, but this is the one that we recommend. So having said that, we would start in the driver or rider's position and check all the testable items that are available. Then move to the near side of the front of the vehicle and across the front of the vehicle to the offside. Then along the offside to the rear offside, and then across the rear, we're back at the near side again, and then come forward to the front near side, checking all the testable items for presence, security, condition, and operation.
And the underside?
Pretty much the same for the underside. The big question here is whether the vehicle will fit over the pit or on the hoist. But we'll deal with that when we get to the underside. I want to start here in the driving position.
And just before you start here, this engine is warm, so isn't this the best time to do the emissions test?
No, because we don't do emissions tests on trikes and quads.
That's a good reason.
Yeah. Having said that, if the vehicle emitted substantial quantities of avoidable smoke, then the tester could refuse to test.
I'll let you carry on then,
Yeah.
Tom. This vehicle looks as if it has motorcycle-derived steering and suspension. Does it?
No, it doesn't, but it does have handlebars, so I'm going to talk about the procedures of checking the components. There's no steering wheel.
I had spotted that. So what are you looking for here?
All right, I'm looking to see, are they deformed, fractured, cracked, excessively corroded? Are the clamp bolts tight? Any of the bolts loose or missing? And then I move to the handlebar grips. Are they missing? Are they not secure to the handlebars? And finally, if there were flexible handlebar mountings fitted, are they excessively deteriorated?
So that's the condition.
Yeah.
What about the operation?
Right, for the operation, I'm going to turn the steering from lock to lock. And I've got the road wheels resting on free moving turn plates, take the load off it. And so as I operate them, I'm checking, is there any fouling or restriction in movement? Yeah. Do the hand grips or any of the controls have no clearance with any part of the vehicle on either full lock? Yeah. And then for the steering, is there excessive stiffness or roughness?
And this has got something to do with head bearings, hasn't it?
Well, partly. When we're carrying out this check, one of the components we could be looking at would be lower head bearings. And if that were the case, then when we get that vehicle jacked up, we would carry out the same checks in case there were problems with the upper head bearings. And one final thing to talk about here, if a steering damper were fitted, if we could see a steering damper, we check to see, is it secure, is it effective, and does it impair the steering action?
Tom, you mentioned any controls, brakes, for example. What about them?
Right, this doesn't have brake controls, but if it did have, I'd be looking to see, are any of the attachment screws loose or missing? Are the controls fractured, cracked? Is there excessive wear in the pivots? Is there deliberate modification? Are they excessively corroded or inadequately repaired? And then for the operation, I'd be checking to see, is there inadequate reserve travel? Can you operate them smoothly on or off? Have they been damaged, positioned, bent or shortened in such a way that you cannot readily apply the brake? Or maybe you just can't move them because they're inoperative.
Which, of course, would be a problem.
Yeah.
What about mirrors? It's all about the right combination here, isn't it?
Yes. Section 9.8 in the inspection manual refers to mirrors, and it looks at bodied and unbodied vehicle. So if we've got a bodied vehicle, they must have at least 2 mirrors, and one of those mirrors must be fitted to the offside.
And what about unbodied?
Right, if it's unbodied vehicle and it's not a moped, then they must have 1 mirror fitted to the offside and 1 mirror fitted to the near side at least. That's the least requirement. If it were a moped, then they must have at least 1 mirror. And if it were first used from the 1st of August 1978, then that mirror must be fitted to the offside.
And you've talked about bodied and unbodied. It's obviously important that the tester knows how to tell the difference.
Yes, and in the introduction in the inspection manual, it gives you clear information about that. But as a guide, if a person sits in the vehicle and there's a surrounding structure, you know, they're enclosed, then that would be a bodied vehicle.
And does it need to have a roof?
How do I answer this, Robert? No.
Okay, what about a windscreen?
Right. Now, if it had a motorcycle-style windshield fitted to an unbodied trike or quad, like the trike I was riding earlier, then that's not regarded as a windscreen and it's not subject to the inspections.
And if it isn't a motorcycle-style windshield?
Right, then that would be tested as per section 8.3, which would obviously include wipers and washers.
And I imagine no windscreen, no wipers and washers check.
Yeah, exactly. We'll make a test for you yet.
When I've seen you test a car before, you'd test the seatbelts at this stage. Am I right in thinking that these vehicles actually don't require them?
If only you were right, but unfortunately you're not. Those that are not required to be fitted with them are three-wheel mopeds and quads, not exceeding 250 kilos unladen weight. If you then think about types of seats, where you've got the tip-up occasional seats, they're not required to be fitted with them. If you've got an unbodied vehicle, where the driver's seat is the sit-astride saddle type, they're not required to be fitted with them. Any passenger seat of the type I've just described that's fitted immediately in front or behind the driver, so it's in the longitudinal plane, they're not required to be fitted with them.
So what about those that do?
Right, the requirements for those are listed in 9.5, and they apply to any vehicle first used from the 17th of June 1999. Section 5 of the inspection manual, it shows the requirement for vehicles used before that date. However, there are some type-approved unbodied vehicles that may not have seatbelts fitted, and that's also covered in section 9.5.
Great, Tom. And this is where you normally check the lights.
You know me so well, Rob.
And I imagine you need an assistant.
Yeah, any check where the tester cannot operate and examine the component at the same time, then assistance will be necessary.
And let me guess, the light requirements depend on whether it's a moped or not?
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. Yeah. So, having said that, I'll start with mopeds. Now, depending on the width of the vehicle, and this is an important factor, you'll need at least one of dip beam headlamp, front position and rear position lamp, that's side light and tail light to you, stop lamp and rear reflector, and they must be mounted centrally.
And does this apply to all mopeds?
Well, no. You see, it's this width thing. If the width of the vehicle exceeds 1.3 metres, that's 1,300 mil, then they will need at least two of front and rear position lamps and stop lamps. Now, the reflectors are different. If it exceeds 1 metre, 1,000 millimetre, it will need at least two reflectors on any vehicle. Now, where two lamps are fitted, so let's say, for example, stop lamps, they must be fitted symmetrically.
And if it's not a moped?
If it's not a moped, then they'll need main beam, dip beam, front and rear position, stop lamp, hazard warning lamps, registration plate lamp, and rear reflectors. And the moped width rules are the same.
And don't some have to have two headlamps?
Right. If you've got motorcycle-derived trikes, they do, if their width exceeds 1.7 metres, 1,700 mil.
And did I fall asleep? Because I've heard no mention of direction indicators or rear fog lamps.
No, I thought I'd save them till last. For the rear fog lamps, there's absolutely no requirement. For direction indicators, you'll need at least two fitted to the front and to the rear. Now, they're required on three-wheel bodied mopeds and, of course, on any trikes or quads. And where you've got direction indicators, hazard warning lamps fitted, then you must have telltales.
And no doubt there's a chart in the manual.
There's actually two charts.
Great, double whammy. So that only leaves headlamp aim.
The tester will conduct the headlamp aim just as they do for any class 3 or 4 vehicle.
And at this point you'd walk round checking the top side, and here it's similar to a car, but the trike over there looks entirely different, Tom.
That's a good prompt, Rob, because what we're going to do now is use the trike to talk about the topside check.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, Tom, obviously to me the steering and suspension on this trike look just like a normal motorcycle. Most class 3 and 4 testers won't be familiar with this setup, so how should they go about it?
Just as they do for any steering or suspension that they examine. They'll check this front fork assembly for any component that's missing, loose or cracked. They'll check if they're excessively bent, misaligned, corroded, worn. They'll check for excessive free play in the sliding members of the forks, pivot bearings or bushes. And they'll check to see is it restricted in operation or fouling. And then they'll examine the dampers for security, leaks, and obviously light oil misting is not a reason for ejection. They'll also examine them for fouling and the damping effect. They can apply the front brake on this type of vehicle so that will help them when they carry out the BANTS test and check the damping effect.
And what if the dampers have got gaiters or shrouds?
Right, none of the reasons for ejection for the fork assembly apply to the gaiters or shrouds. The tester can pull back the gaiter to aid the inspection, provided there's no dismantling, and of course they must be correctly refitted.
So that's the dampers. What about the springs?
The springs, they check them just as they do any other spring.
And what if the tester comes across any modifications?
That's just a matter of assessing the vehicle structure as you would any prescribed area.
When would be the best time to jack the front suspension?
This would normally be done when you've completed the underside inspection, you know, when it's still over the pit or on the hoist. But at this point, I want to continue talking about the topside check. It's as per the routine that we discussed earlier, walking around the vehicle, checking all the testable items. The tester may find some items that are a little bit different. For example, there could be driver and passenger footrests that are fitted for the safe operation of the vehicle, and they would check these for presence and security. There could be foot-operated brake controls on this type of vehicle, and they would apply the checks and criteria as per section 3.3 to 3.6. As they walk around the vehicle, they would be checking the body and structure as per section 6. And of course, although we're not doing emissions, we would be carrying out those other checks from that section.
What, like exhausts and fuel systems from section 7?
You never cease to amaze me, Rob.
I do my best, Tom. What about the rear suspension?
Well, on the rear suspension, if it had a motorcycle-derived suspension, then they would carry out the checks and criteria as per section 9.2. But if it was normal car suspension system, then they would apply the checks and criteria as per section 2.4, 2.6 and 2.7.
What now, Tom? The underside?
Yes, and the tester can use a similar routine to the one that's in the inspection manual, you know, starting at the steering and then working their way around the underside of the vehicle, checking each component as they come to it.
When you were in the driving seat of the quad, you mentioned steering checks with the front suspension jacked. Is that as straightforward as on a car? For the majority of vehicles, it will be. Whether it's class 3 or 4 testing, they should have the necessary equipment. There is, however, a special notice that explains the difficulties in testing narrow track vehicles. And is it now time to talk about bearing?
Yes, when you've got the vehicle jacked up, you'll carry out, again, those lock-to-lock checks and assess the condition of any upper head bearings that are fitted.
So from now on, it's pretty much like a normal car?
Yeah, the tester will assess the wheel and hub assembly and examine it for loose spindle or securing nut, and the locking devices for those securing nuts missing or insecure. They'll look at the wheel, check the wheel bearing for roughness, tightness or free play, and they'll check for any part of the assembly fouling any part of the vehicle.
And the tyre tread requirements, are there any differences there?
There's some. Section 9.4 needs to be read in conjunction with the tyre tread requirements in 4.1d, but basically, if there were a trike with an unladen weight exceeding 410 kilograms, or any quad, then we apply the 1.6 millimetre requirements, you know, the centre 3/4 around the complete tyre. If we had a trike with an unladen weight not exceeding 410 kilograms and an engine capacity greater than 50 cc's, then we apply the 1 millimetre rule, which is, you know, any 3/4 around a complete tyre. Now, if we had a trike of the weight I've just mentioned that had an engine capacity not greater than 50 cc's, then all the original tread pattern needs to be visible, but there's no tread depth requirement.
And the jacking of the rear suspension?
There shouldn't be any real problems here, and of course the tester will conduct all the normal checks that they do with tyres, wheel bearings and suspension.
So on to the brake test now then, Tom.
Yeah.
And is it possible you might actually do a road test here?
Yes, this could happen if we couldn't fit the vehicle onto the roller brake tester, or if there wasn't enough information on the data chart and lockout wasn't achieved, then the tester may do a decelerometer test, but only if it's safe to do so. Mm.
And the actual brake controls themselves are different to a normal car, so how do you deal with them?
It's not only design here, Robert, there's different requirements as well. So if I try and explain it this way, with the design, and I'm talking about service brake here, there's 3 different types. You can have one control that operates the whole braking system. You could have 2 controls, each operating separate halves of the system. Or you could have 2 controls, at least one of which operates the whole system, and these ones we refer to as linked braking systems.
And what are the requirements of the service brake?
Okay, there's 3 requirements. So any quad, yeah, or trikes first used from the 1st of January 1968, they've got the service brake operated by one control working on all the wheels. Their minimum requirement is 50%. If you've got trikes first used before the 1st of January 1968, 3-wheel mopeds or light quads of any age with the same design service brake that I've just mentioned, their minimum requirement is 40%. And then if you've got braking systems that are operated by 2 separate controls, then one half of the system must achieve a minimum of 30% and the other half of the system minimum of 25%.
And don't they also need a park brake?
Yes, and that must be a separate control, and it must be able to be operated from the driving position. And all the checks on that are contained in section 3 of the inspection manual.
No doubt there then. What about the efficiency of the park brake?
Okay, the minimum requirement is 25% on a single line braking system and 16% for all other systems.
And all this detail is actually in a chart in the manual, isn't
Yeah.
it? Are there any other important points listed that we should know?
Yes, if the tester's dealing with linked braking system, then the force from all the wheels operated by that braking system must be used in the calculation. And finally, if the tester has a vehicle and there's insufficient information on the data chart and they haven't achieved lockouts on the brake performance, and it's not safe to conduct a decelerometer test, which, let's face it, isn't always easy on trikes and quads, then the presenter will be asked to provide the unladen weight, to which the tester will add 140 kilos for driver and fuel, etc. And this is the figure that they will use when they calculate the brake efficiency.
And the performance check is carried out in the same way as any class 3 or 4?
Yeah, this is the point, in fact, of section 9. It's supplementary information and additional reasons for ejection. It's as we said at the beginning, it must be used in conjunction with all other sections of the manual.
And are there any other final points you want to make?
There's one final thing that's worth testers remembering. They may be looking at what appears to be a small car, but it is in fact a quad. And speaking of small, I've got one thing I'd like to show you. All right?
Okay.
Do you want to follow me?
So, Tom, would a tester need to wear a helmet if they're doing a road test?
There's no legal requirement, but we would always recommend it. And that one's yours, so put it on. Testers need to pay particular attention to highly stressed parts of the bike or sidecar if one is fitted. And this also includes engine mountings if the engine is a stressed member of the structure.
And presumably fractures, damage, distortion or corrosion in the structure likely to affect the braking or steering will result in a fail.
Yeah, as would any deliberate modification which seriously reduces the original strength. We also need to check any sidecar attachments, and any insecurity, abnormal wear or play in the attachment would fail, as would any attachment missing.
And what about those sidecars that lean as you go round corners?
Right. On those, we need to check the operation of the attachment pivot points. And any excessively tight, worn or deteriorated pivot points or bushes will fail. Sophie.
Now here's our bike with brakes. Are we going to be following the routine set out in the manual today?
Not as such, because if this were a real MOT inspection, then the brake controls would be checked at the same time as steering suspension.
Now, is it the same procedure for all bikes, including those with sidecars?
It is, but there's a date here. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready, Tom.
OK. 1st of January 1927.
1927. Now, there can't be that many bikes around here predating that.
No, that's true. But bikes first registered before that date must have a system working on at least one wheel. Bikes first registered from that date must have an efficient braking system with 2 means of operation or 2 separate systems.
So handlebar brakes and foot brakes then, for example?
Well, that's how they are on most bikes. Of course, some bikes have the brakes operated from the handlebar controls. Some have a link braking system where one of the controls operates both the front and rear brakes.
And this bike, this has 2 braking systems, does it?
It does. And the first thing the tester needs to check is the bike fitted with an appropriate system.
And what about ABS, Tom? Is that part of the test?
No, it is not. But if the tester finds any ABS defects, then the presenter should be advised. It actually says that in the inspection manual.
So what are we testing for?
There's a list of things with the controls. Insecurity of a control or its mounting, an attachment screw loose or missing, a fractured control lever or mounting, excessive wear in the control lever pivot, inadequate reserve travel is another thing. Is there a control which is inoperative or so damaged, bent, positioned or shortened that it cannot be readily applied? Or is there a control which cannot be applied and released smoothly?
And what about hydraulics? Will we be testing those?
Yes, we do, and we apply pressure to each system twice. So first, slowly, like this, and then rapidly, like that. Each time to a point where sustained pressure can be held. Be checking for creep or sponginess. Now, sponginess could indicate air in the system, and if that were the case, it would be a failure.
What do you mean by creep? Not holding the wheel?
No, I mean that the control continues to move under pressure.
OK, and do you check the controls for anything else?
Yes, you do. You check them for excessive corrosion, fracture, severe distortion, or an inadequate repair.
And I suppose modifications come into it at this stage?
Exactly right. Deliberate modifications are a reason for fail if they significantly reduce the original strength of the component. Now I'm going to continue the checks from off the bike.
Right. Need an assistant?
I do, and it's you. So if you'd like to get on the bike, Soph.
Now, most modern bikes have hydraulic systems, so would you check the hydraulic fluid level at this stage?
Oh, yes, you would. But more than that, you'd check, is the reservoir securely mounted, not severely damaged or corroded? Is the reservoir cap present? You mentioned fluid level just now. The tester would check to see, is the fluid level dangerously low or the system leaking? Because if that were the case, they would be failures.
And would you remove the reservoir cap in order to do all that?
No, there's no need to do that because that's not a requirement.
And what about the hydraulic pipes and hoses?
Pipes are not commonly used, but if they are fitted, the tester would check to see are they excessively chafed, corroded or damaged. They'd check are they adequately supported. In the case of hoses, they would check to see are they kinked, twisted, chafed, corroded, deteriorated. And the criteria here is the defect excessive?
So what degree of chafing would you consider to be excessive?
Right, let's have a look at these examples. This hose is chafed, you can see that, yeah? And this one cracked, exposing the reinforcement, the cords. When it's like that, that's a failure.
Now, hoses can become trapped, can't they?
Yeah, if pipes or hoses are likely to be trapped or fouled by moving parts. In the case of hoses, if they're stretched by steering or suspension movement, it would be a failure.
And what about the protective sleeve around the hose? What if that were to become damaged?
That would be OK if the pipe or hose that it's fitted to is not damaged.
And you test all this under pressure?
Yes, you do. So your test would be looking for a bulge in a hose or a leak in any part of the system.
Now, brake hoses can be replaced, can't they? Anything to look out for there at all?
Yes, there is. Now, I've got this example here. This is an anodised alloy banjo fitting. Did you like that expression?
I did, Tom.
Okay. A tester needs to be careful when checking these and the union nuts because they're not recommended for road use. If these were fitted, then the presenter should be advised.
Right. And what about if the machine had a linked type braking system?
Right, with a linked type braking system, all master cylinder and caliper pivot points should be checked for freedom of movement and for wear.
And if it were cable operated?
Right, if it were cable operated, if the cable were knotted, excessively corroded, badly frayed, or if the outer casing was significantly damaged, they would be failures.
Now, this bike has hydraulics operating the rear brake from the foot pedal. What if it had a mechanical system operated by rods and levers? What would you check then?
Right. Serious reduction in the strength of any component due to excessive wear, cracking or damage. So, for example, if we had a brake rod reduced in diameter by more than a third of its original dimension, there's chafing, corrosion, damage to rods and levers, corrosion and damage to linkages, worn clevis joint. And again, the criteria is the defect excessive. Then there's locking devices, loose or missing. So, for example, a lock nut or a split pin.
Now, split pins, they can be found on other parts of the brake assembly, can't they?
Yes, they can, and there's other brake components to talk about. So, for example, disc pads. Now, a disc pad must be not less than 1.5 millimetre thickness at any point. If you want to know what 1.5 millimetre is, it's the thickness of a new 5p piece. Can you see that?
Oh, yeah.
Then there's sintered pads. Sintered pads must be not less than 1 millimetre thickness at any point.
Sometimes pads can be difficult to see, though, can't they?
Yeah, some brakes are totally enclosed, and the tester cannot do any dismantling to get a better look. So if they can't see it, they can't test it.
And what about discs and drums?
OK, discs and drums can be failed for insecurity or cracking, securing bolts loose or missing, contamination of the friction surfaces by oil or grease. Brake discs can fail for being excessively scored, pitted or worn, or if they have excessive distortion or run out.
Now, some brake discs are fully floating, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. And testers need to take care not to fail them for insecurity simply because they have movement.
And the movement mechanism itself?
Right, this is looked at for restriction to the free movement of the mechanism that's likely to impede its operation. Then there's abnormal movement of levers indicating maladjustment or excessive wear.
And anything else at all?
Yeah, checks need to be made on the security of brake backplate, reaction brackets or calipers, and for securing bolts loose or missing.
And how do you go about doing that?
This is done by rocking the bike back and forth with the brake applied, and the tester checks for movement in the brake backplate, reaction bracket or calipers. One other thing to bear in mind is that some braking systems, the levers are designed to operate over centre.
And if the tester is in any doubt at all, can they do a road test?
They can, if they have a doubt of the effect of an observed defect. They can, at their discretion, conduct a road test. They need to make sure that they're qualified to ride that machine and that it's safe to do so. And on that happy note, we're going to carry out a brake performance test. Right, we're going to use a roller brake tester for this performance check.
Right.
And there's a couple of things to think about.
Okay.
So, let's say, for example, there was a tyre that was seriously underinflated and the tester thought it was likely that damage would occur. They may decide not to carry out the performance test.
Okay.
Yeah? Wheels that are not in the roller set, they must be chocked and, where possible, braked against the reaction force of the roller brake tester. This is particularly important for lightweight machines and those with small wheels. If the test needs to be repeated, then the chock will need to be repositioned once the bike has settled in the rollers.
OK, now would I be right in thinking then that with the linked braking system, it may not be possible to chock and apply the brakes to the wheel that's not in the rollers?
Exactly right. So in that situation, it would only be possible to chock that wheel.
OK, and what about the sidecar brake? Does the tester need to take that into consideration?
Right, the retardation force on the sidecar brake is not to be included unless, of course, that brake's operated by any of the controls on the motorcycle. Yep.
OK.
Now we're going to carry out the test.
Right.
So it works like this. With the tester sitting astride the machine, they need to line the machine up correctly with the roller brake tester. And before you arrived, I took the trouble to weigh the machine and to weigh myself.
Okay.
Now, obviously, the tester's sat astride the machine, and the bike is lined up with the rollers. And so now they just drop it in, let it settle in the rollers.
Right.
Now, if you could put the chock behind the rear wheel, that would be good.
Wheel. There you go.
And I've applied the brake, and if you could hand me that control there, please, Sophie. Thanks very much. So now, they just start up that roller, yeah, and I've got the rear brake applied.
Okay.
And make sure that the bike stays lined up in the roller.
Right.
And then slowly apply the brake, taking it right through till the wheel locks out or they achieve a maximum effort. And note that effort.
Okay.
Start the roller again. And slowly apply the brake to about half pressure and hold it steady and watch the reaction on the gauge, and then slowly release the brake and to zero. We're checking for sticking or binding, severe grab or judder, excessive fluctuation, or rise or fall not in proportion with the application. If necessary, the effects of any of these may be confirmed with a road test. What I do now, move the machine forward and go through that whole lot again on the rear brake.
So you've noted the results. How do you then calculate the efficiency?
Well, the first thing to think about is if the wheel in any system locks, then the efficiency for that system is considered to be met. We don't have to calculate.
Right.
If it doesn't lock, then we do have to calculate using the formula that's in the inspection manual, and we calculate the brake efficiency for that system. You take the retarding force for that brake system, which you've noted, then take the weight of the machine plus the tester, which you get from the designated weighing equipment. Divide the force by the weight and then multiply by 100. And this gives you the answer as a percentage.
So what are the minimum percentages?
Right, at least 30% from either system and at least 25% from the remaining system. Of course, don't forget that earlier bike that I spoke about.
The magic date, 1st of January 1927.
Good memory. Right, on those you would want at least 30% from one system.
So what if the tester, using their experience, knows that the brake efficiency is very low for that machine?
Right, provided the machine has passed the test, then the presenter should be advised that brakes may require attention.
And what about the other kinds of brake performance testers?
Another type is the plate brake tester. Again, we need to determine the weight of the machine and the tester, but fortunately most plate brake testers incorporate a weighing device. We can now start the test. At a steady speed of approximately 4 miles per hour, drive the machine onto the plate tester. As soon as the front wheel is on the plate high friction braking surface, gradually apply the front brake until maximum effort is achieved or the wheel locks and skids. Note the way in which the brake effort increases and the maximum value achieved. Repeat the procedure for the rear wheel and in appropriate cases the sidecar wheel. The machine calculates the efficiency of each braking system.
OK, and what if the bike has a linked or a dual braking system?
Depending on the type of system, the tester will need to make 1 or 2 additional runs to obtain the correct efficiency for each system.
Now, there's another type of test, I think, that's called the floor test. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes known as the pull-along tester. This type of equipment is no longer allowed for new authorisations. It comprises a spring balance and system of pulleys arranged so that the effort required to pull a machine and rider forward against the brakes can be measured. With the machine held upright and in a straight ahead position, attach the cable from the spring balance to the front of the motorcycle using a strap around the front forks or the headstock. The tester should sit astride the machine operating each brake in turn and note the readings while the assistant operates the spring balance system. With each brake applied in turn, record the effort required to move the motorcycle and rider forward. Having determined the weight of the machine and tester, you can then calculate the efficiency of each braking system.
Are there any others at all?
Yeah, there's the gradient tester. These are few and far between nowadays, and also they're not allowed for new authorisations.
Okay.
They consist of 2 ramps, one set at a gradient of 30% and the other set at a gradient of 25%. Using one is very simple. On both gradients, sit astride the machine facing downhill. Apply each brake in turn and confirm that the machine can be held stationary. One final thing to mention, if testers are using floor or gradient equipment, bind, grab or judder assessment can be done at any point during the test. Bind would need to be significantly more than any normal expected drag. Decisions on grab and judder may benefit from a road test, bearing in mind driving qualifications and safety.
Simple as that?
Yep, simple as that.
Let's move on to appeals. Can you take us through the appeals process?
OK. As well as appeals, we'll also look at the formal warning review process that was introduced in 2007.
OK, let's start with formal warning reviews. What exactly are they?
Well, there never has been a statutory right of appeal against the issue of a formal warning at the time it was issued. They would only be considered by appeals section in cases where the formal warning was cited in a further case, which subsequently led to cessation.
And so what's changed?
Well, after consultation with the trade industry, the authorised examiner and nominated testers were granted a non-statutory right of a review of any formal warning.
OK, so what's the process?
Well, if the authorised examiner or tester believes that the issue of a formal warning letter is unjustified or that the allocation of points is excessive, they may request a review of the case.
And is there a timescale in which they have to make that request?
Yes, there is. They will have to apply in writing within 14 working days of the date of the issue of the formal warning letter.
And where do they write to?
Well, they'll have to write to the local Vosa office that issued that warning letter, and then it will be forwarded on to the appeals section for review. OK,
so what about appeals against cessation? Is the process the same?
Yes, it's very similar. In order to have your appeal considered, you must apply in writing, by letter, fax or email. Give a reason. It's not enough to say, I wish to appeal. You must say why your authorisation or approval should not cease. To assist you, grounds of appeal are listed in the guidance. In time. Your written appeal must arrive within 14 working days from the date on the cessation notice. To the right place. It must be delivered to the address on the notice, usually Vosa's local area office. You don't have to complete the appeal yourself. Someone, a friend, employer, consultant or solicitor, can act on your behalf.
Are they allowed to make their appeal in person?
Yes, they can. An appellant can request an informal hearing whereby they can present their own representations in person to a member of the appeals section.
And details of this can be found in Appendix 8.8, can't they?
That's right. But it's important to note that any such informal hearing is additional to and not in place of any written representations.
And is it a bit like appearing in court?
No, not at all. It's informal and it'll be held in one of Vosa's meeting rooms.
And would anybody else attend an informal hearing?
Well, the appeals section will arrange the meeting and they'll invite representatives of the local area office to come along as well. And they may ask an engineer if any technical items may need further discussion for clarification.
And I assume that the AE or NT is also allowed to be represented by their trade association, consultant or solicitor?
Yes, you assume right, Robert, yeah. And any oral representations will be recorded and considered along with any evidence held on the file before an appeal is decided.
How independent is the appeal process?
Well, appeal sections are completely separate from and totally independent to Vosa's MOT operational policy areas. This is essential for the integrity of the process.
And what aspects of the case will they consider?
Well, they'll look at the local area office considerations and decisions and also any interview responses and representations. They'll also consider to see if the disciplinary action taken was lawful, fair and reasonable, and whether any disciplinary action was proportionate to the circumstances.
So a complete review of the case then. How long does the appeal process usually take?
Well, it's normally processed within 5 weeks of the appeal date or the informal hearing. Most cases are processed in date order, and it's worthy of note that you may be in a queue of cases waiting to be processed.
If, say, an AE is anxiously waiting the outcome of an appeal, is there anything they can do?
If an AE or tester is anxious about the progress of their case, they can contact MOT Appeals to find out where they are in the queue and when they might expect a decision.
What happens if the date of cessation in the cessation notice has arrived, but the appeal hasn't yet been decided?
Well, you must stop testing on the date specified in the notice, even if you haven't yet had your decision. When the decision is made, appeals will write to you telling you what the decision is, along with a comprehensive explanation as to how the decision was made.
And what are the chances of an appeal succeeding?
Well, that will depend on the particular circumstances of the case, but currently about 20% of all appeals are successful.
What are the reasons that can lead to an appeal being allowed?
Well, for instance, if someone handling the disciplinary case has made a serious procedural error, or if there's doubt about the circumstances surrounding the case, the quality of the evidence, or the penalty imposed is considered to be too harsh.
OK, I've gone through the appeals process and lost. Is there anything I can do if I'm unhappy with the decision?
Yeah, there are 2 more avenues you can take. You can approach your Member of Parliament with a view to having the case referred to the Ombudsman, or alternatively, you can apply for permission to have the case reviewed by a judge by way of a judicial review.
Could you do that yourself?
Well, you can do, yes, but most people would take legal advice on that.
Overall, Jake, how many AEs or NTs are likely to encounter formal disciplinary action?
Well, actually, very few. Most authorised examiners and nominated testers take their roles and responsibilities very seriously, and generally they do a good job. To give you an example, only about 1% of testers each year will actually get involved in formal disciplinary action, and out of those, only a quarter will actually end up in cessation.
Great, Jake, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Vosa is implementing a new approach which changes the way it interfaces with testing stations. To work more effectively and more efficiently, Vosa is focusing its resources on testing stations that represent the highest relative risk of non-compliance. All test stations will receive an initial assessment based on the current vehicle examiner's annual visit. After that, test stations demonstrating a low risk of non-compliance will receive fewer visits from Vosa. Now, all test stations should receive and get guidance on one of these. This is the best practice guide. It covers the standards that Vosa consider to indicate low risk of non-compliance. In it are what Vosa called the 10 risk attributes, and these are the areas that Vosa will be assessing during the rollout of the new approach at every test station. It illustrates the standards towards which stations should aspire in order to be considered as a relatively low risk of non-compliance. Vosa has consulted with trade bodies and other interested parties, and there's been a thorough trial into this new risk-assessed approach. This is one of the test stations that took part in that trial.
I think it worked extremely well. We learned a lot from it. Very impressed.
And how did that compare with the old VTS visit?
I think the assessment again works well. They ask you a lot of multiple choice questions as well. You need to know several answers to some questions. They ask the testers questions as well. They're put on the spot. But from an operational point of view, fine, yeah, no problem.
And how about the assessment itself? Did it take long?
The first one we were on was a trial, so it probably took a little bit longer than the normal assessment visits, because we were learning a lot at the same time. But we're thinking in future then it would be about the same amount of time. And
what about testing that day? Was that impacted upon at all?
No, we didn't interfere with our testing day. As such, we'd had a testing beforehand, which they retested the car anyway. We hadn't got any more test planned, luckily for the afternoon, so they were fine, no problem at all.
Well, I mentioned consultation. During the 2 years that this new approach has been in development, that consultation has been through the Trade User Group. This is a forum of trade bodies that have helped Vosa before on key issues like MOT computerisation.
I think Vosa have maintained reasonable contact with the Trade User Group through the project and notified us of progress as and when it was necessary. And at key stages during that process, they've sought our opinion and consulted us on various points. For example, we did have the opportunity to express our concerns about how Vosa would notify testing stations of the procedure, what their gradings were and what they would need to do to address any shortcomings to become a low-risk test centre.
What will it mean, do you think, for the trade?
The change shouldn't be too difficult for anyone that is complying with the right standards. Obviously, Vosa are trying to assess risk for the testing stations. Those that are relatively low risk will be subject to slightly less scrutiny than are at present. Those that Vosa believe to be of a higher risk are going to be looked at more closely and more frequently.
So do you think that the quality control that Vosa has put in will work?
Yes, I'm sure they will. The trade user group did have some early concerns that there would be inconsistencies in the inspection standards, but having seen the control measures that Vosa have put in place, both in making sure their examiners can inspect evenly and consistently evenly, plus the measures that are put in to double check that, then yes, I'm fairly confident they've got it right.
So do you think it will be an improvement?
I think anything that is intended to raise standards and concentrate efforts on, where they're needed to improve the guys that are, perhaps not working so well, then it has to be good.
To actually continue with an enforcement process that's been around for a long number of years just wouldn't be accepted by our key stakeholders in government. There's been a number of reviews carried out, and government is expecting all enforcement agencies to adopt a risk-based approach. This follows that principle and also falls in line with what we're doing with other sectors that Vosa carries out enforcement on.
Well, let's take a look at one of these new style visits using the best practice guide as we go. And by the way, you can access this guide from the menu at the end of the film. Now, Vosa's Steve Kendall has been working with the trials team. Steve, hi.
Hello, Sophie.
Now, tell us, will the VEs get special training for this?
Yes, they will. There's a full training programme in place. The VEs will be assessed on site to make sure that they fully understand the system and the processes in place, and this is to maintain consistency nationally. So whether a site assessment is conducted in Inverness or in Penzance, Vosa need to be confident that we've got a consistent approach to these assessments.
So what's your start point?
The vehicle examiner will have interrogated MOT computerisation and got a number of reports out and examined them for what we would class as abnormal statistics. These reports are available to the authorised examiner, and they should also be looking at their reports on a regular basis.
So are all of these covered on the assessment form?
All the questions the vehicle examiner needs to ask are covered on the site assessment form, whether they be targeted towards the nominated tester or to the responsible person.
So if these wider issues aren't scheme compliance issues, then why is Vosa now looking into them?
Vosa's taking a more holistic approach to site assessments. If I can use an analogy, like when a customer walks into a restaurant, if you walked into a restaurant, you'd not be just looking at the quality of the food, but you'd also be looking at quality of service, the cleanliness of the restaurant, helpfulness and friendliness of the staff. And Vosa is going to apply that sort of process to a VTS.
So I imagine, therefore, you'll want the AE or the site manager to be there to answer questions.
Ideally, the AE or the responsible person would be on site. However, from Vosa's point of view, if the site's open for testing, then the AE is confident in his staff that they can conduct tests to the correct standards and levels and provide that service in his absence. And providing that there's testing ongoing, then we're happy to conduct that site assessment. The responsible person, therefore, may or may not be the AE, but the AE needs to be confident that whoever they've left in charge for that day is actually capable of fulfilling that function.
So we've had a look at the exterior signage, we've seen the MOT parking and all that kind of stuff, so I guess now we can go and introduce ourselves to the responsible person.
And then we'll see to the VTS device. So we'll go do that now.
Great.
We're going to do some compliance-related checks. Here's the VTS device.
OK.
Number of checks we need to complete. Firstly, around location, sighting, condition, operation. We're also going to look at whether there's a vehicle registered for test on the system.
So that sounds very similar to the old style test.
That's identical to the inspections that the VEs are carrying out now, yeah.
And what else will you be looking at?
We need to look at fallback and emergency testing, whether they've issued any documentation, and if they have, we need to look at 18 months worth of that.
OK.
For more specific details, they're all in the MOT testing guide.
So are there any other issues related to the VTS device that you'd look into at this stage?
We need to look at smart card and smart card security, and also the security of the password for that smart card.
Great. And where do you go next?
Next, we're going to reception. You lead.
Back this way?
Yep.
Well, this reception area looks very customer friendly to me. What exactly will you be looking for?
Once we're in the customer area, we're going to be looking at the normal compliance issues, so we're going to be looking at the information displayed on the notice board and customer leaflets.
And what about facilities? Will you be looking at that as well?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at cleanliness, tidiness, whether you want to wait here as a customer.
And what about your staff? Because I know it's a bit of a cliche, but your staff are the most important resource, really, aren't they?
Absolutely. So we'll also look at the staff facilities, see what you've made available for them.
Now, as a customer, it's lovely to walk in here to a nice, friendly environment, but my experience doesn't end there, does it? Will you be looking beyond that?
That's your experience as a customer. I'll be looking at how they manage you as a customer from their perspective. So I'll be looking at things like how they keep the documentation for a vehicle together, how they ensure that the vehicle handover, both from you to them and back again, is done in an efficient and customer-friendly manner.
Now, I know that you look at MOT documentation anyway, but now you're going to be going beyond that, aren't you?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at documentation management, if you like, how those documents are kept together and presented back to the customer when the job's complete.
Now, any customer-facing organisation, no matter how hard they try, are going to face the occasional complaint. Are you going to be looking at how the garage deals with those complaints?
Yeah, we're going to look at how they deal with the complaint in terms of whether they document it and the process they got in place for dealing with the customer.
So I know that some garages charge varying amounts depending on the customer. Are you going to be looking at that?
Yeah, not only will we look at the charge-out rates, if you like, between private customer and trade customer, but we'll also look at the business relationships that the garage may have with other businesses.
So what kind of customer relationships are you particularly interested in?
There are only two types of customer. That's the trade customer and the private customer. With respect to the trade customer, we're looking for the amount of trade that's provided by that trade customer, particularly if that's a majority share of the work. With respect to the private customer, we're interested in the locality. Where does that customer come from?
Why is locality of interest to you? Because, I mean, if I drove from the southwest today, why would it be interesting that I got my car MOT'd here in the Midlands?
As a single event, that isn't interesting to Vosa at all. We would be looking at the statistics and saying that's a journey, but are numerous people making exactly that same journey or similar journeys? And then the question that we would have to ask is why. At the end of the day, a VTS provides a service which is the same or should be the same wherever you go throughout the country. And if large volumes of people are passing other VTSs to come here, the question's got to be why. Statistically, we'll look at that and we can pick up some more statistics from the test bay. So
Great.
We'll go there.
OK. Now, all the test equipment and its calibration comes under compliance, doesn't it? But you're now going to be asking questions about the rest of the garage equipment and its calibration, how that's maintained.
Yeah, that's right. We're not just looking at MOT equipment, we're going to look at the whole of the site. And it's not just about calibration, it's about maintenance, and it's also about training. So when the responsible person or the authorised examiner brings in a new piece of kit, we want to make sure that the staff have actually been trained and it's not just thrust upon them. And that, again, that doesn't matter if it's MOT equipment or workshop equipment. We want to see documented evidence of that training process.
Now, that goes over and above MOT equipment requirement. Is this all part of the new, more holistic approach to assessment?
It is, and beyond the equipment we'll be looking at the structure and fabric of the building's repair and maintenance programme and whether there's any supporting documentation.
A well-maintained building and well-maintained equipment, both really important, both really great. But what about the staff? What about their performance and integrity? Will that now be part of the best practice guide?
Absolutely. It is covered by the best practice guide, and obviously they're the most important tool in the facility. MOT computerisation provides a number of different reports, things like the MOT test log and the scheme performance report, that enable the responsible person to measure what's going on, even if he's not here. The importance around the best practice is to use the reports to assist the responsible person in running the facility. So if there's any abnormal values identified, it's about them investigating those abnormal values, because what's abnormal to Vosa from an outside perspective may well be true and quite normal to the responsible person.
And how about the testers? Are there now going to be specific questions targeted at them?
Yes, there are. Historically, we watched a demonstration test, a practical demonstration test from start to finish that included the use of the VTS device. We've changed that slightly now. We're going to be asking a mixture of theoretical and practical questions of the nominated tester, really to probe their knowledge and understanding of the scheme.
And what about the responsible person? Will their knowledge be tested individually?
Yes, absolutely. The assessment of the responsible person is slightly different. We're looking for MOT scheme knowledge and knowledge about the way he manages and maintains the site.
So is that just about everything covered then?
Yeah, that's a brief overview of the best practice.
So you carry out your assessment, you compile your report. What happens to your report then?
Well, a copy of the conclusions of the report will be left with the responsible person. This will detail all the feedback that's been given to assist them in reducing the assessed risk of non-compliance. And this is where the responsible person will find that the best practice guide is most useful to them.
So would you expect a garage to act on that?
Yeah, I'd expect the garage to act on the compliance issues that's been raised within the normal timescale stipulated. With regard to the information and feedback given regarding the best practice guide, with reference to the best practice guide, if they take that on board, then their assessed risk of non-compliance will be reduced.
And what does Vosa do with all the information that's been collected?
Vosa will collate that information together with other information within MOT computerisation and use that to come up with a risk-based assessment score for the site.
And does any of this affect the disciplinary process at all?
No, not at all. The disciplinary process remains exactly the same as published.
And do AEs have any grounds whereby they can appeal the assessment?
No, there's no statutory right of appeal under this process. This process is all about benchlining garages to enable Vosa to best use its resources.
So if a test station has a very high risk rating, how would they go about reducing that?
When Vosa come back and reassess the site, if things have clearly improved, then obviously the risk of non-compliance will be reduced.
So every VTS is going to be visited. When's that all going to happen?
That's already started and it'll be completed by March 2008.
And what about test stations with a very low risk rating? Do you think that there's a danger perhaps that they might lose contact with Vosa or their local vehicle examiner?
No, there's no reason why that should happen. The lines of communication that are open now will still be open during and at the end of this process, and all the information for that can be found on the back of the best practice guide.
So to sum up, there are 10 areas of risk that Vosa is assessing in addition to the compliance checks that they've always carried out. There's the visual workplace, infrastructure and facilities, equipment maintenance, customer management, commercial factors, customer base, AE and NT competence and integrity, performance data, and document management. And as Steve said, they're all here in the best practice guide. And having been through it yourself, have you got any words of wisdom for anyone like you who may be a bit apprehensive about this change?
Not to worry about it. The system works well. They're helpful with the questions they ask you. I just think it's a good system. Yeah.
I think for AE and site managers, it's important to remember that nothing has changed as far as standards go. If you're one of the better testing stations who are doing a good job and constantly doing so, then there should be nothing to worry about.
The advice in this best practice guide will help you ensure that your testing station is not assessed as being at high risk of non-compliance. It could also help you provide a better service to your customers. It's all part of Vosa's commitment to reducing the regulatory burden on compliant testing stations and raising the overall standards within the scheme. Welcome to the latest edition of MOT Matters. Mobile phones. Now, we've nearly all got one, but how many of us use or even know how to use all its functions? This one apparently has got a radio in it. I never use it. Now, we've all got gadgets these days with an ever-increasing set of functions that we rarely use. Your computer, for example. That's because they're all designed for a highly competitive global mass market. Some things, though, are specifically designed, like this VTS device, a system designed with the tester and AE in mind. Now, you're all experts at using the VTS device to log vehicles for test, but it can do much more than that. So I'm going to show you some of the additional functions and just how easy it is to use. But for that, I need a Vosa bloke. Well, this is Vosa's training school at Chadderton in Manchester, where we have a VTS device especially set up, ready for filming, and technical trainer Brian Gray is here to guide us through it. Brian, hi.
Hello, Sophie.
What are you going to show us?
I'm going to show you some of the extra functions on the VTS device that's designed to make life easier for testers and authorised examiners. Give you a few tips on what to do if things go wrong. And
I notice we've got a flat screen.
Yeah, that's to make things clearer for the film.
Should we start with the worst case scenario? Let's start with what happens if things aren't quite as they should be.
Well, most important, don't get in a panic. Simply switch it off check all the connections are OK, and then restart it. You'll be amazed how many times that fixes the problem.
The turning off and on again thing. But I imagine, as with your computer at home, you want to close it down properly, don't you? Not just...
Dead right. You remove your smart card, wait for the greeting screen, and then press F12 to shut it down.
And what if turning it on and off doesn't work?
You can check your phone line, ask yourself whether all the other phones in the building are working. You can also plug an analogue phone into the socket that the VTS device uses, see if you get a dial tone.
And how do I tell it's an analogue phone?
This is one here. It connects with a cable and less than a tenner in this day and age.
And so how do I decide whether it is a problem with MOT computerisation or not?
Right, if you've tried these quick and easy steps that we've got here and it still doesn't work, then you'll need to contact the service desk.
And if I do that, what's the procedure? There'll be a recorded message, will there, that will guide me through what I do?
Yeah, that's right. It'll make it a lot easier if you've got to note to hand just with your VTS number, your user ID, and any error codes that are displayed on the screen.
So have a pen and paper handy, jot those down, and of course any incident number that they give me should I need to call them back.
Yeah, absolutely. And when phoning the service desk, it's always a good idea to listen to the opening message.
So Brian, an engineer is on the way. How do I carry on testing?
Oh, it's very simple. If you've got a problem with a VTS device or the telephone line, then you test in what's known as fallback.
And how do I use the fallback system?
You need to follow a few easy steps. You make a note of the vehicle details, VIN number, registration number, and you must use your VT40 checklist for this. You'll need this for verification purposes later, which we'll look at in the NT section. Once you've made a note of all the details, then you call the service desk and when prompted by the message, select the fallback option.
If you have already reported a fault and would like to carry out a test under fallback, please press 3.
When the service desk agent answers, he'll ask you some security questions because he needs to identify you, because you could be anybody, couldn't you? So you give them the details you noted down. They'll register the vehicle on your behalf, provide you with a test number and any VSI details, then you write that down on your VT40.
And then just test the vehicle as normal?
Yeah, and when you finish, contact the service desk again, selecting the fallback option when prompted, giving any failure items across the phone, and then you just use the normal documentation, but you write it by hand.
That's all great, but if I'm very busy, that is 2 telephone calls per vehicle, isn't it? Is there not a quicker way?
Oh yeah, you can speed it up again. I mean, when you ring them to enter your test results, if you've got another vehicle you want to test, you can register that one at the same time. That means 1 call instead of 2.
OK. Is there anything else I need to do?
Yeah, you'll need to check that the test details the service decks have entered are correct and confirm them, and I'll show you how to do that later in the NT section.
Great. Now, that all sounds quite straightforward, so why is there a need for emergency testing?
Emergency testing needs to be used when there's a major problem with the MOT computer system, which is affecting many test stations.
And how am I going to know that that's the case? How will I know that other people are experiencing problems too?
If we're in emergency testing, when you ring the service desk, there'll be a recorded message, and that'll also give you the ET code.
Welcome to MOT computerisation on the 3rd of July 2008 at 1000 hours. Please be aware that emergency testing was declared at 1000 hours. The emergency incident testing number is 7403010. I repeat, 7403010. For information regarding emergency testing, please refer to section N in the testing guide and use emergency incident testing number 7403010. If you're able to test as normal, please do so.
And what if there is such a major problem that I actually can't get through to speak to anybody?
Well, you don't need to talk to anyone. All you need on the recorded message is the ET authorisation code, and then away you go. And most of all, if you miss the code, don't get in a panic. Redial and then get the code. And then what you should do after that is you should ring the service desk periodically to check whether the message has been updated.
So that pen and paper coming in handy again. What about the actual emergency testing procedure? Is that complicated?
No, if you've been testing for a while, it's a bit like the old paper-based system. You do handwritten certificates, you keep a register, a bit like the old VT12, and you enter the test back up on the system when it's back up and running.
And will every testing station have some of those?
Oh, yeah. They'll also have a testing guide, which outlines the process clearly in section N.
OK, well, that all sounds quite simple. What about standalone testing?
Vosa recognised the need for a process which would avoid emergency testing and eliminate the need for catch-up.
And what are the kinds of circumstances in which that might happen?
What it means is, although your VTS device is working, it cannot communicate with a central system.
So will there be a message on my screen telling me that I'm in standalone testing?
Only on the greeting screen, but you are prompted to put in a VT32, which will have details about SAT printed on it for the customer, as well as a piece of plain paper for the VTS to keep for their records.
And why can't we just do it in fallback testing?
The service desk would never cope. I mean, there's over 130,000 tests a day. I don't think they'd have much chance of answering the telephone. You never do it. You never do it.
Well, I can see that makes sense. So we're in standalone testing. Is there anything we need to do differently?
Well, the good news is you don't need to verify test results and you don't need to perform catch-up. When you're in standalone testing, you carry on testing normally, but you'll notice there's extra wording on the VT32. You can carry on testing in standalone testing for around about 4 hours, and then the system will ask you to enter a standalone testing code.
And where do I get that from?
Service desk. Ring the service desk.
Great, well, that all sounds quite simple. Are there any other ways I can keep up to date with new processes and MOT computerisation?
Yes, there are. Whenever the MOT comp system's updated, then the details are listed on the service news page on the device. You can also read matters of testing. There's often articles in there highlighting new processes and giving top tips on existing ones.
And what kind of stuff do they feature?
We try to concentrate on processes that are used regularly, but we know give NTs and AEs a problem.
And how do you know that they're causing a problem?
Feedback. We want NTs and AEs to let us know if they want us to explain anything to them. If as an individual they're unsure, then there's bound to be other individuals that are unsure as well.
And let's have a look now at some of the areas of the VTS device that testers sometimes struggle with.
Yeah, well, the first thing to remember, Sophie, is that most questions can be answered by having a quick look in the VTS device user guide.
So the user guide is actually within the VTS device?
Oh, yeah, just hit the F5 key. That'll take you across to the screen where you can access the guide.
If I press the F5 key, then, am I going to lose the screen I'm on at the moment? Will I use the information there?
No, not at all. You can just hit the F5 key and go back where you were.
And what about the hard copy of the user guide?
Yeah, you can refer to this, but the version on the VTS device is always up to date, whereas you can't rely on this one being up to date.
So that's been constantly updated,
Yeah.
the one within the VTS device?
That one's always up to date.
So, what's next?
Well, let's have a look at using the spare smart card, eh?
What kind of occasion would I need a spare smart card?
Well, there's a few occasions. Maybe you've just left it at home, or maybe you've lost it, or it's become damaged and you're waiting for a replacement.
Right, so what's the first step?
Right, well, we'll need the spare smart card, and then I'll take you through it. I'll be the site manager, and you're the tester.
Righto.
So what I need is, I go to other functions, I go to administration, nice and easy on the menu. I go to smart cards, look at my options, and one is issue spare smart card.
That's pretty straightforward.
So I go there, and what I need is your user ID, which I think if I get it right, is that. Days required, well, you haven't lost it, it's not damaged or
Just
anything, you
left it at
don't need a
home.
replacement, you've just left it home, so I'll leave that 1 day. If you did need a replacement, then I'd change that to 5, give time for that to turn up. We'll change that to missing, because it's not damaged. If you did need a replacement, I'd click there, but you don't, so I'll simply continue. And the machine will tell us what to do.
OK.
So what it wants is me to remove mine,
And
you to quickly put that card in.
Because it says I've got 20
Anyway
seconds
round.
to do that.
That's it.
In that one goes.
What it wants now is you
What's
to enter
my
your
password?
passwords, and that's
Okay.
personal to you, I can't do that. I'll look away. And then we'll just select continue, and again, it's got F2
So
on
click
there.
continue or F2.
You can click it, or we can use F2. Now, it'll dial out, and remembering that it's me that's logged on, so it's going to need me to put my card back in.
So you're still
Yeah.
in control of the system,
I'm still in
and it's
control
your
of the
smart
system.
card that's issuing
It now
me a
wants me to
temporary
take that one out quickly, put my one back in within 20 seconds, and it's now come up and told you that's issued.
Great.
So I can take my card out, and when the greeting screen comes up, if you want to log in, you can log in.
And who would keep the spare smart card?
The spare smart card should be kept secure, so the site manager authorised examiner, designated manager, should just keep that locked away somewhere. When you've got your own card tomorrow and you come in, you'll need to return that card. And once you've done that, when you start to use your own card, you must synchronise it when you start. If people forget how this works, it's all in the VTS device user guide. So you go over to F5, takes you across to that page, and there you've got all the reference material lined up. If you want to look in the VTS device user guide, anything to do with spare smart cards is section 10K. So we scroll down the menu, go to the next page, and there I can look at issue spare smart card. So all I've got to do, click on there, and all the information
that
talks
you
needed.
Through everything we've just done.
And this is one of the useful bits in the user guide. The path that you need to follow is listed, usually on the first page.
Now, earlier we talked about emergency testing, fallback testing and standalone testing, and you said you'd explain how to verify the fallback test results. Just first of all, explain what that means.
Well remembered. If you've tested in fallback, then you'll need to verify the test results that the service desk entered on your behalf.
So is that to check that they're all correct?
Spot on, dead right.
OK, so how's that done?
You'll need to have the results of each fallback test as well as the test number.
And those are the results that you will have recorded on the VT40 form?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah. Right here.
And what if you have forgotten or not done that for whatever reason?
Well, you can request an overnight report on the MOT comp system, a test log, which will have the details. But you really should use the VT40 because it's a requirement that handwritten VT40s are retained by the station for 3 months.
OK, so we've got a VT40 here. Should we verify the details on this form?
Yep, I'll take you through it if you want to pick through the menu. So
Great.
what we're going to do, verify the results. It's not on that first menu, so it's got to be another function. So we've got to come down to number 7, other functions.
Either click on that or, of course, you can use the keyboard.
Of course, you can use the keyboard.
I'm going to click.
That's it. If we look on this screen, we've got an option at number 4 that says fallback, SAT and emergency testing.
And we want to verify a fallback test.
That's it, so we just click on that one. That will take us
click.
to another menu. And we wish to verify a fallback test result.
So that's nice and clearly marked at number 1.
That's it.
Click.
So now you can see there that it wants you to input a test number. There's a test number on the top there.
210
44
3090.
That's it. Now we just go for test results. You can use the mouse or the keyboard again, as indicated. That's it, and it brings up the test details. You can see all the details are there. Just keep scrolling down.
So we can compare it.
Yeah, we're just making sure that this is the correct vehicle we've got there. This is definitely it. What we need to do, because I know this vehicle failed, so we need to check the apply reasons for rejection button.
So I'm going to click on
click
apply
on that.
reason for rejection.
That's it. Now we'll just check that all the failure items are correct and we're happy with that.
OK, so this screen has got a list of all the details and the reasons for rejection.
Yeah.
Just talk us through that.
Well, that's the screen that's all the failure items. I'll just make sure they've been recorded correctly.
So you're comparing and contrasting all the time your VT40 form with the results in the VTS device.
What I'm looking at is to make sure that the fact that we've dealt across the telephone, that we haven't had any mismatch of information, misunderstanding,
so that they've
etc.
recorded everything that you've told them
everything's recorded correctly. As you come down the screen on the left-hand side, you can see there's a menu of all the different manual areas. I need to just make sure that the brake test result has been entered correctly. So that's just telling us what the vehicle was, what type of braking system it had, what type of brake test we did, which was a roller brake test, all roller brake test. So I'll just continue from that screen. And now I've got the figures, so all I'll do is I'll turn over the VT40 and I'll just check these figures against what's there. And that all matches up, that matches up. I noticed there's a slight mistake at near side axle 1 on the parking brake. Near side axle 1 has got the number 220 in the box. It's been recorded as 220, but it's actually 225.
So what do we do now?
So I can make a minor adjustment to that. So if you change that to 225...
Just while we're doing that, just sort of clarify what minor is.
Yeah, I can change minor details to the information that have gone across there, like brake test results Maybe there's a number wrong on a back to front on a VIN number. What I can never do is change the test result.
When you say the test result, that's pass or failure?
Yeah, pass or fail, that stands. I can't change that.
So, we've made our minor alterations.
We've made our minor alterations.
Happy
all the
with
other figures
everything
are
else.
correct, so I'll just go for continue, which is the bottom left. OK, that now comes up and shows me what the figures were. If I'm OK with that, I will confirm the brake result at the bottom.
Confirm brake result.
Brake result, that's it. It's come up there. It's just put in front of me the failure items and the service brake performance report. If I scroll down, I can just view a summary of the results.
So you click on that or hit F2?
You click on that one or hit F2. There's the items it failed on. That's all OK. I'll verify it. I'll hit continue. I come to the final screen. It's telling me the result was a fail. There's a drop-down box there, and what I need to select is I accept or have changed the pre-populated data, which is what we've done.
So you're just confirming that you've made that minor alteration?
I accept what's on there. We can just accept results now.
OK.
That's it. It's
so
done.
that is a full-back test.
Yeah, that's been verified.
So, Brian, we're nearing the end. Have you got any final tips to offer us?
Yeah, we've noticed that quite a few testers are not acknowledging QC checks to the system.
So what should they be doing that they're not doing at the moment?
What they should do is just log on to the system and then no QC checks shown on the front screen. So, as we've got used to, it's obviously another function, isn't it?
So number 7.
So come down to number 7. So I'll just click on quality control, and the tester should only have one option to choose on the screen. So all he would need to do is just select that, then up in front of him will come the comments put on there by the QC. And then he just needs to check that and then acknowledge that he's actually seen it.
This section has been put together for those of you at a VTS who manage MOT operations. You'll probably be in an AE role or a site manager role. Now, Brian, these roles sound important, are they?
Oh, yes, they are. Yeah, different roles in the MOT computerisation system allow you to do different things. The site manager's role, by its very name, is very important to the efficient running of the station.
What sort of things do they do with the VTS device?
Well, via the device, the site manager receives messages, like reminders and alerts. If the site manager doesn't act on some of these reminders, then it may stop the station testing.
So give us a few examples of when that might happen.
Sure. Equipment calibration. As you know, a lot of the equipment needs regularly calibrating. And because you have to enter the calibration dates into the MOT computer, the system sends you reminders.
And what if you don't do that in time?
The system could stop you testing any vehicle that requires that piece of equipment. So it's very useful to check your messages and not let that happen.
Well, let's have a look at the VTS device now, shall we, and see some of these messages that you might encounter.
Yeah, it's nice and simple. A bit like checking your emails or reading a text message.
Great. Shall I have a go? If you talk me through?
Certainly. Just put the mouse on number 6, messages, VSI and reports. Just click that. Now go read message, number 1, just click that. And then we've got some messages. That's about a test equipment report that we requested. If you tick the little square box, that will keep the message. And then just click on next message. We can see if there's any more.
Next message. And VTS users will be completely used to this screen, won't they?
Because the numbers are also telling you can use the keyboard as well if you wish. What they need to do, VTS users, is always to click next message and not just look at one and go straight back to the menu because they don't know what others they've got.
Oh, right, so you need to keep on clicking through them.
And if you want to keep it, you click message. That's the lot. So all we'll do is just return to menu where it says F12.
Great, well, that seemed quite easy. What should we look at next?
Well, let's have a look at reports. There's quite a few reports that you can request on this MOT system to help you run a good test station.
Like?
Well, let's try requesting VTS test log.
OK, what does that contain?
It's a bit like the old VT12 register. It lists all the tests that are carried out at the site. It's a good job to request this on a regular basis. It helps you keep an eye on the testing activity and what's going on. Like with all reports, you request it and it will be delivered with your messages overnight.
So how would I use that information?
Well, hopefully, it'll help you monitor and improve your operation. Right, let's see how to request a report.
OK.
Right, if you'd like to select other functions on the screen, number 7, and then administration, and and you'll see Request VTS Admin Reports at number 2. That's it. Now what we're going to select now is Test Log Site number 3, if you'd just like to select that.
Right.
There we go. So it wants the site number, which it's got. Date range, well, we just do today. That's no problem. And then we haven't got to put any dates in. So all we'll do is click the Request Report button down the bottom.
So how do I view a report?
Well, the reports are sent in a similar way to the message we looked at earlier.
Oh, right, great. I can remember that, actually.
That's it.
I'll go back...
Messages, VSI and reports. So down the bottom says View Reports. And that's where we'll find the reports to view. Sometimes the message may arrive before the report was fully downloaded. So all you would do is just try again later.
So are there any reports that show the performance of my VTS?
Yeah, there's one called a performance report. It's
Well
pretty
named,
good, isn't it?
yeah.
Provides a summary of your performance failure rates, test times, for example, based on 100 tests. Very useful for quality control, for example. Vosa's making improvements to the report to provide much better information.
So it's basically a case of looking out in matters of testing to see when that's happening.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You can also check on the performance of your testers.
And how do you do that?
Well, you can select the personnel report. It has details of training dates as well as QC dates and results.
And is there a report which lists the testing equipment that I've got on site?
Yes, there's two which show this information. You can either request the garage information file, which has details about your site, including equipment, or you can select the equipment test history report. They both have calibration dates and they have the equipment ID number, which you'll need when updating equipment.
And I trust all the information you need about reports is going to be in the VTS user guide anyway, is it?
Correct, section Q. There are instructions on how to request and view reports, but I'd recommend just requesting a few reports and trying it on the system. I'm sure you'll find some useful information there.
So everything you need in there?
Everything you need's in there.
Great. So if I'm an AE and I'm going to go on holiday, can I use any of this to make things run smoothly while I'm away?
Oh, you most certainly can. It's a good idea to make sure you've got enough test slots so the site can carry on testing in your absence.
So how do I find out how many test slots I have?
Well, there's a couple of ways to do this. You can check your messages. Every day you log a test, then the system sends a message to the site manager, tells you basically how many tests you've done, and it also tells you how many test slots you have left.
OK, what's the other way?
Well, on any of the print test document screens, it has the test slot count at the bottom, as you can see there.
And can I let someone else on site order slots while I'm away?
Oh, yeah, you can, yeah, but you will need to give them a role on the MOT system first.
And what are the roles?
There's only 3 roles which can order test slots: the AEDM, the AE delegate, and the account management roles.
And which one of those do I choose?
Well, let's choose the account management role.
OK, how do I do that?
Right, if you select other functions,
Uh-huh.
and then administration, number 1,
Right.
and then people and roles, number 4.
Makes sense.
What we want to do is link user to account management, which is number 4.
Right.
Right, what we need to do is put the user ID of the person we want to give the role to.
OK,
So
which
if you'd like to type that in there.
have here.
That one there. And then your site number, the one underneath, B100 203. Now if you select the link to account management radio button just above the user ID,
Right.
and then just update account management details. That's it, we've done it.
So is that all?
Yeah, one more thing. The person you've given the role needs to synchronise their smart card to update their roles on the system.
Right, OK. And then when I come back, can I remove the roles that I've given them?
Yep, and what you should remember to do also is to make sure you've removed anyone from the list of employees if they are no longer employed by you.
OK, so let's just talk me through how I go through removing a role.
You need to go to Update User Role screen, so you'd start at Other Functions, you then go to Administration, and you then go to People and Roles.
So people and roles, just like when we were giving the
That's
roles.
it.
So when I get there, people and roles, it gives me 2 options: update user roles site and update user roles AE. Which should I select?
If you're a single site, then you only need to use the site option. If you're part of a large organisation with many sites, then you can use the AE option, which allows you to update roles at any of the sites belonging to your authorisation.
OK, well, I think I'm going to be a single site and choose the site option.
Yeah, sounds a good idea.
Cool.
So now we type in the user ID of the person whose role you want to remove. And That brings up the update roll screen. The left-hand side of the screen shows any rolls they currently hold. So to remove the roll, you simply click on the roll on the left-hand side, click remove roll, then select update user roles. Job done.
Cool. OK, so now I've got the right people with the right roles. Have you got any tips on ordering test slots and documentation?
Yeah, I'm sure everyone knows how to order test slots, but you'd be amazed how many people leave it to the last minute.
And there are cut-off time for paying for slots, aren't there?
Yes, there is, yeah. 3 p.m, Monday to Friday.
What about at the weekends?
Well, at weekends, the fees collection team is closed, so you won't be able to purchase test slots using a credit or a debit card at weekends. And I should add, just as a note for people, be careful over long bank holidays.
Yeah, so the message is don't leave it till the last minute.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Yeah.
OK, so I think there have been some sites that have had problems with their telephone lines and then haven't been able to use their VTS devices. What are the requirements regarding telephone lines?
Well, one of the most common problems is the use of broadband. When sites upgrade their telephone systems, they often include a broadband line. The VTS device will not work on a broadband digital telephone line.
OK, is there anything else I need to be aware of if I'm changing my phone system?
Yeah, make sure you don't have call waiting facility or the 1571 facility.
And what if I have a problem with my telephone line, even though I've checked all the requirements, and I can't test? What then?
Well, you can continue to test, as what we already looked at, using the fallback facility.
And who's responsible for the line?
If you pay for the telephone line, then it's your responsibility to get it fixed. If it's a line that's been provided by Siemens, then you need to ring the service desk.
OK, so far it all looks pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's right. We've tried to keep it simple, and for AEs and site managers, they can really monitor how well their testers and MOT tested business is performing.
There are around 19,000 MOT test stations in Britain, and each one has had to go through the authorisation process. Apart from the checks of the test bay and equipment, the process ensures, as far as is reasonably practicable, that successful applicants are suitable for the role of authorised examiner. When discrepancies are found, there are systems in place to address the issues, including advice by the local vehicle examiner, advisory warning letters, and nominated tester retraining. However, in more serious cases, Vosa may invoke formal disciplinary action. To ensure fairness and consistency, the procedures for such action are open and fully documented in Section I and Appendix 8 of the current edition of the MOT Testing Guide. So what are the methods used to monitor test standards, and what issues can lead to disciplinary action? Vosa Vehicle Examiner Jake Fawcett's going to talk us through it. Hello, Jake.
Hello, Robert.
Where do we start?
Well, OK, let's start at the beginning with the VTS device itself. Authorised examiners have available to them lots of information about a particular site that might be under their control, or even about individual testers. Some of the information you can get off the machine will involve throughput, failure rates and average test times.
And we covered this in the previous film about best practice, didn't we?
That's right, we did. Vosa also make use of this information that's available on the device so that we can, it highlights potential problem areas with testing stations or individuals. We've actually got one testing station that I visited recently where he believes that we've actually implanted a camera in the monitor so that we can see what's actually going on at his particular site.
That's not the case, is it?
No, it's not. Anyway, the statistical information that we do draw off the device is useful to us. But we do also employ more direct traditional methods, such as regular VTS visits, re-examination of vehicles, mystery shopper exercises, and also we follow up customer complaints.
So what kind of discrepancies would lead Vosa to consider disciplinary action?
Well, our disciplinary process is points-based, and it's designed to encompass all aspects of the MOT scheme, be it fraud or gross negligence, and it also covers more common aspects such as poor testing, misappropriation of the testing scheme at site, and things like that.
And presumably the number of points scored would be in proportion to the severity of the incident.
That's right, Robert, yes it is. But if the individual case that we're looking at that particular time didn't amount to 30 points, then it wouldn't be a problem. But 30 points or more, the disciplinary process would be started.
And isn't it the case that disciplinary action taken as a result of shortcomings by a nominated tester would also count against the authorised examiner?
Yes, usually it will, but it's not always the case. Also, the outcome of any disciplinary action may be entirely different for the authorised examiner and the nominated tester.
So where can we find out more about this?
Well, if you look in the testing guide at Appendix 8.6 and 8.7, there are flowcharts there that will assist us in deciding on any sanctions that might be taken.
Let's imagine that during the re-examination of a recently tested vehicle, the vehicle examiner discovers shortcomings in the test standards applied. What's the first that the tester would know about this?
Well, the first thing to do is to get everything out in the open. So what we would do, we would discuss the discrepancies of the testing standards with the nominated tester and the responsible person on site.
And if the tester has carried out a reasonable test but just made an error of judgment, would formal action be taken?
It's very unlikely. Usually the vehicle examiner will give guidance on site or maybe even issue what we call an advisory warning letter. And this letter will advise the tester that he may be able to take extra training on site and certainly to study the tester's manual.
And I assume the authorised examiner would also get a copy of that advisory warning letter.
That's right. The authorised examiner needs to be reminded that he's responsible for the actions of his testers. And he also needs to be satisfied that the person is attaining the standards required for testing.
OK, well, let's assume that things have gone badly wrong and it becomes clear that the tester has carried out a very poor test.
Well, what we'd do then is we'd carry out a formal interview with both the nominated tester and the responsible person on site.
When you say a formal interview, do you mean one conducted under caution in the way that the police would do interviews?
No, what we do here is we read what we call an MOT caution. And we do this so that everyone involved understands the implications of the interview. The full pace caution, as used by the police, will be used in cases where we think prosecutions may follow. And that would be in a case such as serious fraud.
So what's the MOT caution?
Well, the MOT caution goes something like this, and I carry a copy in my notebook to be able to read to people so that they understand. This investigation may lead to disciplinary action being taken against you, and you are not obliged to answer my questions. You are also advised that it may harm your case if you do not mention when questioned, something which you later rely on in your defence.
What's this interview intended to establish?
Well, it allows the nominated tester to fully account for his actions, and so that we can fully establish, investigate and report the facts. The main body of the interview will cover the following points. Confirmation of the identity of the tester, including their date of birth. Establish that the nominated tester understands the caution. Establish whether the nominated tester wishes to call witnesses to the interview. Confirm that all of the defects and/or overruled items were shown to him. Confirm whether the nominated tester agrees with the VE's assessment of each component, and if not, follow this up and ask them to support their argument. Confirm that any demonstrated corrosion detection followed prescribed procedures. Establish whether there were any extenuating circumstances surrounding the test. Give the nominated tester the opportunity to say anything else, and get them to confirm that the interview was conducted fairly, and then get them to read and sign the vehicle examiner's notes.
So having got the interviews out of the way, what happens next?
Well, the vehicle examiner will make a full report, including photographs of the vehicle and any defects that might be present, provided they're defects that can be photographed.
Presumably the report indicates how many disciplinary points have been awarded for each test shortcoming.
Yes, and in this case it will be as detailed in Appendix 8.2, Incorrect Test Standards.
And a copy of the VE's report and the photographs get sent to the tester?
Yes, that's right. We write to both the nominated tester and the authorised examiner, and we enclose any documentary evidence that's going to be taken into account. And these are what we call contemplated cessation letters.
What about any previous warnings that have been issued? Are they included in the letters?
Yes, they are. The letters will include any previous formal warnings that are still valid and are going to be considered. Also, if the total point score could lead to the tester or authorised examiner being disqualified from the scheme, the letter will also mention any credit points that have been gained.
And what are credit points?
Well, we'll come on to credit points a bit later on, Robert.
OK. Does the letter give them the opportunity to make representations about the test shortcomings or any mitigating circumstances?
Yes, it does, and they have 15 working days to make any representations that they might like to make.
Do they have to make representations themselves, or can they seek advice from, say, a solicitor?
No, they can make representations themselves if they want, or they can take advice from a solicitor, or any one of the specialist MOT consultants or trade bodies.
OK, Jake, take us through what happens once the area office receives the representations.
Right, well, the area office will only consider the case once the 15 working days for representations has passed. Then the senior vehicle examiner or the area manager will reassess the case fully, taking into account any representations that may have been made.
And what if no representations are received?
Well, what happens then is that the area office will take reasonable steps to alert the authorised examiner and nominated tester that the deadline is coming up, and that might take the form of telephone calls.
OK, but representations or not, I assume the Vosa manager's considerations need to be recorded and included in the decision letters to the AE and tester.
And that's right. Any considerations will be based on a balance of probabilities, and the agency will have to be able to demonstrate to an investigating authority that all the representations that have been given due consideration, and of course that will include any secondary evidence.
Is it possible to better explain what's meant by balance of probability?
Yeah, basically the balance of probability is defined as where there is sufficient evidence to lead a reasonable person to conclude that it is at least more likely than not that an offence has been committed, and there are reasonable grounds to establish that belief.
That seems fair enough. What about any previous formal warning letters?
Any previous formal warnings that are still current will be given consideration, but only if they've been cited in the contemplated cessation letters. Also, the merits of any other previous formal warnings must be fully reassessed, even if there have been no further representations made about them.
So a very thorough reassessment of the case then. But what about those credit points that you mentioned earlier? Can you tell us more about them?
Yes, of course. Credit points are detailed in Appendix 8.5, and these will be awarded for things like satisfactory testing, satisfactory operation of the MOT testing station, and any tester training that goes beyond our minimum requirements for testing.
What would qualify as an example of satisfactory testing?
OK, if we consider a mystery shopper or re-examination of a recently tested vehicle, the tester should score no more than 10 disciplinary points for unsatisfactory aspects found during the examination. It must be noted at this point that re-examinations as a result of an appeal or a complaint won't be considered for any credit points at all.
And how many credit points are awarded?
OK, well, the authorised examiner and the nominated tester will each be awarded 10 credit points for satisfactory tests. And these will apply to all tests carried out in the 5 years prior to the case being considered.
And what about points for the satisfactory operation of the testing station?
Well, these will be awarded to the authorised examiner, and he'll qualify for 5 credit points for each full year of satisfactory operation of his testing station. And that'll be between the current case and any previous formal warnings. And that'll be up to a maximum of 5 years.
And in respect of credit points that are awarded for training, what do you mean by training that goes beyond the minimum required standards?
Well, that's a good question. There are a number of conditions surrounding training that qualifies for extra credit points. And things to include will be things like the length of the training, who provided it and where it was taken.
And that's covered in Appendix 8.5, isn't it?
Yes.
How many credit points are awarded for training that qualifies?
Well, normally the authorised examiner and the tester will receive 10 credit points each. And these will still be applicable even if the current case has occurred between the date when they booked the training and the date they actually attended it, provided there's a gap of no more than 9 weeks.
OK, that sounds fair enough. Can I assume that training credit points can be awarded for up to 5 years after the training has taken place?
Well, no, training credit points are only applicable for 2 years. But it should be noted at this point that if a case warrants single offence cessation, then no credit points will be taken into consideration.
As previously mentioned, the disciplinary process is detailed in Section I of the current MOT testing guide, whilst the disciplinary points that can be awarded are at Appendix 8. Appendix 8.1 covers cessation without previous warning for very serious offences and is split into 2 sections. Section A for AEs, while Section B is relevant to nominated testers. Appendix 8.2 covers incorrect test standards, while Appendix 8.3 deals with incorrect test methods and 8.4 with incorrect operation of the testing scheme. In our dummy case, the vehicle examiner found shortcomings in the test standards applied when he carried out a re-examination of a recently tested vehicle. The contemplated cessation letter to the tester cites shortcomings amounting to 40 points. The letter also cites a previous 30-point formal warning. The tester admits that he missed the defects and states that he'll be more vigilant if he's allowed to stay in the scheme. We'll assume that the tester carried out a satisfactory mystery shopper test 2 years ago and is therefore entitled to 10 credit points. So what does the point system lead us to in this case, Jake?
Well, every case will be assessed on its merits and the particular set of circumstances that led to the contemplated cessation letters. The points in this case and the flowchart in Appendix 8.6 will indicate the maximum sanction that can be applied here after full consideration of the current case and the previous case that led to the formal warning letter.
So every case is unique and assessed accordingly?
Well, that's quite right, yes.
So shall we have a look at the flowchart and determine the maximum sanction?
OK. Would you like to take us through it, Robert?
Well, first of all, the current case is scored at 40 points, so the third section of the flowchart applies, and there is an outstanding formal warning, so Formula A applies.
And that's right. Formula A is the points from the current case, plus any points from any unspent formal warnings, less any credit points.
So in our dummy case, we have 40 points for the current case, plus 30 points for the unspent formal warning, less the 10 credit points. That's a total of 60 points.
That's right, and if we refer to the flowchart, you'll see that because the Formula A comes to 50 points or more, the maximum sanction we can apply here is cessation.
And if this were a real case, how long would the cessation last?
Well, Section I of the testing guide indicates that it would normally be for 2 years. However, it can be extended to 5 years if the case is a result of serious fraud, dishonesty or gross negligence, as laid down in Appendix 8.1.
And would the cessation start immediately?
No, normally it would be 35 working days after the issue of the notice of cessation. But however, Vosa can reduce that if they think there's a considerable risk to road safety.
And how is that assessed?
Well, usually if the current case scores 100 points or more, that period can be reduced to 10 working days, or even 1 working day if the current case scores 500 points or more.
In our dummy case, if there hadn't been a previous formal warning to consider, the flowchart would have led us to a formal warning as the sanction.
And that's right, and that would normally apply for 5 years, although it can be reduced to 2 years for shortcomings that are listed in Appendix 8.4. It's also worth noting that the nominated tester may be required to attend additional training course and be successful at it.
And in that case, would the training have to be completed within a particular time frame?
That's right, and that will be stated in the letter. If the tester fails to attend the training course, then his authority to test will cease until such time as he successfully completed any training.
In our dummy case, the vehicle examiner found shortcomings in the test standards applied when he carried out a re-examination of a recently tested vehicle. The contemplated cessation letter to the authorised examiner cites shortcomings amounting to 40 points. The letter also cites 2 previous formal warnings, one at 30 points and the other at 50 points. The tester in this case has admitted that he missed the defects and states that he'll be more vigilant if allowed to stay in the scheme, while the AE has stated that he'll keep a closer eye on testing in the future. We'll assume that the tester carried out a satisfactory mystery shopper test 2 years ago and is therefore entitled to 10 credit points, which would also be credited to the AE. The last formal warning letter to the AE was 2 years before the current disciplinary case, so another 10 credit points are awarded for 2 years' satisfactory operation of the testing station. Remember that credit points only come into play should the maximum level of sanction indicated be cessation. So what does the point system lead us to in this case, Jake?
Well, each case will be assessed on its own merits and the particular set of circumstances that led up to the issue of the contemplated cessation letter. The points issued in this case and the flowchart in Appendix 8.7 will indicate the maximum sanction that can be applied after full consideration has been given to the current case and the case that led up to the issue of the formal warning letter.
So each case is unique and assessed accordingly?
That's right, yes.
So shall we have a look at the flowchart and see what the maximum sanction would be?
Yeah. Would you like to talk us through it, Robert?
Yeah, of course. This case scores 40 points, which takes us to the third part of the flowchart. There are 2 previous formal warnings, but as they only total 80 points between them, it means that the maximum sanction is a further formal warning.
That's right. But let's now consider what would have happened if we'd had a third warning to consider, say another 30 points. That would bring the total points from previous warning letters to 110.
OK, so that in that case, the flowchart would lead us to Formula A, which is the points from the current case plus points from unspent formal warnings, less any credit points. So in our example case, we've got 40 points from the current case, plus 110 points from the 3 previous unspent formal warnings, less the 20 credit points. That comes to 130 points.
That's right. And if we refer this back to the chart, we can see that because Formula A now is less than 140 points, the maximum sanction we can apply is, again, a formal warning.
So that would mean the AE would have 4 current formal warnings. How long do they last?
Well, normally they last for 5 years, but they can be reduced to 2 years for shortcomings that are listed in Appendix 8.4. And accompanying these warning letters, that there may be a requirement for the authorised examiner to successfully complete further training.
So for an AE, that may mean attendance at an MOT manager's course?
And that's right. And for a tester, it'll probably be a directed retraining course, and that will be tailored specifically to the shortcomings that were noted at the time of the event that led to the issue of the formal warning.
And is there a time limit to complete this training?
Yes, there is, and that will be stated in the letter we send them. If either the authorised examiner or tester fail to attend the training course, then their authority to test will cease, and it will remain that way until they've successfully completed any further training.
If our dummy case had resulted in a cessation instead of a formal warning, how long would the cessation last?
Well, that will be stated in Section I of the testing guide, which states that it's normally going to last for 5 years.
And does the cessation take effect immediately?
No, it doesn't. Cessation for disciplinary reasons usually takes effect 35 working days after the notice of cessation has been issued. However, Vosa can reduce this if they think there's a serious risk to road safety.
How much might it be reduced to?
10 working days if the case justifies 140 points or more after any credits have been considered. And previous formal warnings justifying a total of 140 points or more are still valid. However, notice of cessation may be reduced to just 1 day if the case being considered justifies single offence cessation for fraud, dishonesty, gross negligence, or for a conviction if it's for a very serious offence in connection with the MOT scheme or motor trade.